Name is Merle A. Barrett, born here in Laurel County, 1949.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
Not long after high school, and had gone to work driving truck. It was a milk business, the trucks that go out on the farm and collect the milk where they milk the cows in a tank truck. And at that time, it was smaller trucks. Later on in life, I became the big trucks, was my life career.
In which branch of the military did you serve, and did you enlist or were you drafted?
United States Army, and that letter came in the mail. You show up, young man, or you're going to jail for so long you'll never forget it, and it was $250,000 fine, I think. It was a forced issue, drafted.
What happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training?
Well, looking back at it now, you're pretty much a child. You're a teen. 19 is a teenager, and at that age, you're used to doing what the adults say, and they tell you plenty to do. So you just do what they told you to do, stand where they told you to stand. And the initiation going into military is the haircut, the clothes, and a little bit of changeover and isolated at a training camp. And it begins the process of changing you into something. And it's pretty much what you expect. Advanced Boy Scouts is what it looks like to me now.
Do you recall your instructors or anything about them?
I do. A couple of them especially. And if anyone familiar with the military, everyone goes into what you call basic training. And no matter what area you go into, that's your beginning with the military. And after you finish that, usually a 8-week, which is 2-month period, then you go into specialized fields, further training. But that basic training period at Fort Knox, the group you're with, they call it a whole company, and you'll probably have 5 what you call platoons. And each one of those platoons will have some sort of an officer. Mine was a high-class sergeant, and he was a Vietnam veteran. And then the man that's over those 5 platoons is a captain, and he was a Vietnam veteran. So I didn't know much of what they were talking about or recognize anything from them like I do now, but they are in my memory. And I didn't understand them then, but after I was there and came back, I see things in those guys that I remember. Back to where you were, that man that was over that company was the captain. His name was P.J. Hart. And the man that was my sergeant over the platoon, the smaller group I was with, was Sergeant Rigdon. And looking back, I can see where they took it upon themselves to do what they could to invest something in you in an effort to give you something to keep you alive later. It seemed rough at the time, but I see their point now.
How did you adapt to military life, including the physical regimen, barracks, food, social life?
It's all a change and to be accepted and to move into, but being young and pliable, it was nothing you couldn't handle or overcome. It was, like I said, it was like Advanced Boy Scouts. A little rougher. They were a little rougher than Boy Scouts, but basically the same idea, a little more advanced.
Where did you serve?
It was pretty much of a done deal. You show up for basic training once the process, the paperwork, basic training, which is like 8 weeks. And the normal cycle is you'll graduate from basic on Friday afternoon. Saturday morning, the next morning, I was in Fort Polk, Louisiana, beginning infantry training. And that's like 9 weeks there. And the day I left Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is infantry training, When we arrived there Saturday morning, came in on a Trailways bus, and the plaques beside the entrance says, "Welcome to Little Vietnam, infantry training for Vietnam." After the 9 weeks at Fort Polk, they gave me an order and a destination to be at a place 10 days later. So I really had no time from the time I left home drafted, basic training, graduate Friday after Saturday morning, you're at a 9-week training, finished that 9 weeks, I had 10 days to be at the West Coast from the time of being inducted. It was quick. They wanted you there quick.
Do you have any memories that you would like to share about your service abroad?
There's a lot of memories, and sharing can be a little dicey. In a basic way, trained as an infantry soldier was my training. And it's multiple weapons, multiple tactics, and getting you as good as they can into the mindset. And I'd like to say up front that when you ran into the real thing, which what I ran into was being infantry, I was assigned through some paperwork and replacement and filtering out to where you got with who you're going to be with. But it's what you call a line company. And their only job was to operate as an attack force in the jungles of Vietnam. And that's the only thing I did the whole time I was there. It goes from being a normal human with normal parameters to another planet that has no rules and no experience and nothing close to normal that you've ever known. It all goes away, and you quickly have to go into that mode and that world and able to survive too. Very, very huge, tremendous. 46 or 7 years ago right now for me, and it's still one of the biggest things in my mind.
What kinds of friendships and camaraderie did you form while you were serving?
I'll go into some detail here, but you can edit for what you need. And it's something that is a evolution process. I will speak a little about it, that in Vietnam the process was, as they lost people, either finished their cycle or were wounded or were dead, they refilled those positions. And if my training was infantry, so when they needed a replacement at one of those line companies, that's where I went. And you are come in there as one or two of you to replace. If they've had a big fight, there'll be enough to replace what they lost. And those men that you're just thrown out there in that jungle with them, they've already been there, different stages for different men. But it gets complicated. First, you're the new guy, and there's an unwritten law that new guys have a different place in that environment. And it evolves into you find your place. And there has to be an acceptance, and it comes a little bit slow. And you find yourself moving into that acceptance at this point when you arrive. And later on, you see new people arrive, and you put them in the position that the people before you put you in when you came. And it has a whole order of its own. Well, this is probably not what you're looking for, this side of it. There may be too much detail for what you're looking for. Anyway, you become a member of a trusted group. And everybody's heard the brothers, but I have brothers and sisters. But there's something there that no one has with any brother or sister. And maybe you got another question.
How did you stay in touch with family back home?
It was totally written letters, and you found very little time with what I was doing to write. And mail was actually, in those conditions, was pretty fair. Even in the bush, you might get mail in a couple of weeks, and you might have 2 or 3 letters at a time that's been gathered up some, you know. So they actually serviced the mail with those conditions, I thought, pretty good. And sometimes it was as much as, if you were out more days than what food you could carry, food would come on the helicopter. If there's a place for him to get on the ground, he would land and unload C-ration food for you to put in your gear and carry for several days' work. And sometimes they would have mail with that delivery. And at times where the helicopter couldn't get on the ground because of terrain or jungle, they just throw it down through the trees and stay out of the way when it hits the ground, and hopefully your cans weren't bent up so bad that you could still get an opener on them. That just became part of the game. And if there was any mail, they had a container, sometimes a bag type thing, and they'd just throw it down through the trees too. And so that's how you would get mail in the bush sometimes.
Where were you when the war ended?
You're talking about, it would have been after I came home. I had gone to work driving 18-wheelers. I came home in 70, and I think the U.S. pulled out by 72, maybe 3, and I think then South Vietnam fell to communism like 75, as I remember.
How did you return home?
I was one of those days, and I actually have a picture there that pertains to that. It was like a lot of other things. You go out, and it turned out to be my last time going out. On that mission, like the 10th day out there in the jungle on that mission, I was wounded. And in a fight, in what we called a firefight, medevac helicopter came, and me and some more men that had been wounded were extracted with the jungle penetrator. The helicopter hovers above the trees and lets a penetrator down through the trees. It's a pointed device that'll go down through the limbs. And it has a seat, paddle seats that will fold out, and they have a winch cable, and they'll drag you back up through the trees and on the helicopter to depart. That's how I came out of the jungle into a hospital sometime in Vietnam, some surgery, to Japan, not very long there, but maybe another surgery there, and then to the United States in a hospital, which came through a couple of hospitals, but wound up as near to your home, which was Fort Knox for me, and I wound up at Fort Knox in the hospital.
How were you received by your family and community?
Glad to see the boy come home in one piece, and it was pretty much that, and that's what I could see at the time, and it worked out very well. I was very receiving of it. And in contrast, in some of the interviews you'll have here, some of the men finished their time there and came home on a civilian airliner, landed at a civilian airport. You deplaned as civilians would. But at the time, the political atmosphere in the country was, as if anyone remembers, the riots in the streets and the protest against the Vietnam War, which became directed at the Vietnam soldier, which thankfully has changed with the wars we have now. A change for the better, I'll say. And those guys had some terrible experiences getting from the plane. They came back from Vietnam out of the jungle, real short number of days, first day or second day out of the jungle, and ran into those crowds at the airports. Mine was a little different because I was medevaced out of the jungle and Army hospital, Army transport back to the United States, Army hospital, ambulance and whatever between airport, and it was military airports, military planes, military airports. So I was not exposed to that public confrontation.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
Comparing notes with other veterans I know, I actually was so glad. I had, in my opinion, less problems than a lot of Vietnam veterans did. And I found out later there's some clinical reasons for that. But I was so glad to be alive, so glad to be out of that place and back to what I thought was normal life, that I went for quite a while of picking back up with normalcy. Everything was good to me. Every day looked good. I stepped over that just like stepping over a mud puddle. And I was in, I thought, very good condition after I got out of the hospital and out of the Army. And I raised a family, did well. Problems turned up later on, later for me. And I figured out some of the reasons was been explained to me that if you'll stay plenty busy, and my job was very demanding, and something like that keeps you full-time occupied, and you just never get back to spending any time. And I made a point not to. And come to find out, there's a built-in human tactic to avoid certain things, and I got real good at it. Didn't realize what I was doing, but looking back, it was survival.
Have you remained in contact with or reunited with fellow veterans?
I didn't for 20 years, and someone I was with organized in Washington, D.C. I left there in 70, and this meeting was in Washington, D.C. with about 8 of the guys that I was with every day. I slept in the jungle with them. We dug holes. We faced those bad situations together, brothers. And got to see them again and explaining about the surviving with that history. It actually may have lit a fuse for me. I was glad to see them and didn't give it much thought. But I think it started something.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
I'm thinking back, there's a DAV, which for some paperwork reasons, I joined them not long after I came back, but it was purely a function. And I didn't even know I did it, but I joined a lifetime member just to get it done or to give them some help was my idea. It was a small fee at that time, and really just forgot about it for many years. But when I contacted them again, which I contact them pretty regular now, they had that lifetime membership on record, and it was a benefit.
What have you done since separating from the military?
Went on crutches, on cane for a while, still in the military, and for some time after. But as I got able, which was real soon, I'd say within 3 or 4 months, the way I say it is when I was able to climb up in an 18-wheeler, I went to work driving an 18-wheeler and did that for 33 years. Raised a family, and in anybody's book would have done pretty well operating. And in that 33rd year, for the last 2 or 3 of that, I guess, some problems started turning up work-wise, social-wise, and finally went for some help with VA. And they explained a lot of things of how things worked and why. And it turned out to be very beneficial, but the two was not working out, a working career and dealing with what the VA had to offer.
How did your wartime experiences affect your life?
Mm-hmm. Well, it may sound strange, but that time you were there, it was totally unbelievable. And some of it won't even register in a normal brain. And like I said, I was very positive when I came back. If I saw the sun come up, it was a good day. I had no bad days, and worked intensively, and I didn't even know it, but as I've had some human characteristics for survival explained to me by the VA, I actually used survival skills the whole time, the 33 years in my working career, and using them and abusing them actually. But what was the question again, I think?
Just how the wartime experience affected your life.
Some things are life lessons, and I always try to take advantage of anything that I get my hands on. And I took advantage of all the positives that you learn out of a situation like that and used them, still do. But there's some negatives that go with the territory, and they can be very troublesome to deal with, the negatives that go with the territory. And it changed for us. I'm not sure how it changed, but change majorly. It's actually some places you go, and I can say this now. I couldn't have said this for 35 years. In that process, you go some places that you never come back from. And for me, with VA's help, you learn to survive in a normal society with that history.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
Well, you like to think us on our jobs and in our lives and our families, you make mistakes and you try to learn from them. Something that really don't work out, you just don't do that again. Find a different way or a better way. And evidently, every few years, our nation's history since World War II has been every 20, 25 years or so, has entered into a very unsuccessful war, which gains the United States nothing, in my opinion, and a lot of aftermath that goes with it. Some things is worth those kind of prices, and if it's for something, it's worth those prices. But when it turns out to be nothing, there's no way that it's worth the prices that it cost. Those type decisions, wherever they're made, and our nation has a system supposedly that the people of the nation speak, and leaders supposedly are to listen. And those decisions is the steering mechanisms for our nation and for our people and our survival of our society. So it needs to be, from my opinion, with more consideration than it's been for a long time, including Korea, Vietnam, and the most recent, these Mideast wars that the United States, our people, our equipment, our blood, and our money have been involved in. There needs to be all the consideration and all the caution that you could apply.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
On the treatment of soldiers in their role, I've seen a huge trade and swing. My time was the Vietnam era, and everyone's aware of what was going on in the public sector during the Vietnam War and after the Vietnam War, and for many years since. I think someone that develops attitudes in the nation has seen that, and the more recent wars, there's been a switch in that attitude toward a soldier compared to what war he's involved in. And it's been a change for the better. And I accept it, and I appreciate it. But on a lot of levels, it's way too late for me for that. But I do not reject it. It's a welcome change. One thing I've heard said concerning this Iraq and Afghan war, I heard a lot of people say it, and it's addressing what went on with the Vietnam soldier when he came back. The line is, I'm against the war, but I support the troops. And I see where they're going with that, which is an important part. But in my opinion, you really can't support a soldier that's giving his blood, laying his life, paying the ultimate prices, and investing himself, and not be and be against what he's doing it for. I don't think you can separate that. But as far as it's gone, the change that's come, it's been a change for the better, and I'm appreciative of it, and I accept it. I thought I was about to get away. I went for 35 years or so, and no one ever said anything to me about appreciating my service, appreciating in any way. It was almost Vietnam and war and soldier was practically unmentionable. And the first experience was my family, as a birthday gift, got a Purple Heart tag from my automobile at a public park. And I saw a man coming toward me, and it's actually spooked me. I could tell he had something on his mind, and he was walking straight toward me. And I went to a different kind of mode. But when he got to me, he stuck his hand out and shook my hand and said, and he'd seen the tag on the car. And he said, I'd like to thank you for the service. And it just shocked me. I told him, I said, you're the first man that ever said that to me. And it's more so now in the last few years. But I went for another 5 or 8 years, and I could count on one hand the people that said anything like that to me. And that was more than I'd had the 32 or 35 years before. But now, if you'll wear a hat or anything, and used to I never would, and didn't even know why I didn't, but it just was not going to be. But if there's any evidence that you are a service member now, different people at different times will step up and shake your hand and say, I'd like to thank you for your service. And with consideration of how it got there and where they're coming from, I appreciate for their part. It is better, much better, and I appreciate it.